Directors meeting for March 25th, 2015. The agendas for the meeting are at the back of the room, and if you are interested in speaking, we would ask you to fill out a green card, which is also at the back of the room. I would remind you that this meeting is being streamed. And I would also remind you that it would be most appreciated if you would silence your cell phones at this time. We will start the meeting. If I'd ask everybody to, we'll have a moment of silence, and then we'll follow that with the Pledge of Allegiance. Commissioner Holmes, would you lead us in the pledge?
I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America
and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. It is now time for public comment. I have not been presented any green cards. Is there anyone who wishes to speak? One person who is filling out a green card. Thank you very much. Thank you. Mr. Mose Bell, if you would come forward, please.
Good job.
Good morning, Mr. Bell.
Good morning. I'm an operator here at PSTA, and I haven't been able to attend these meetings, but I've been looking at them online. In the past few meetings, I've heard citizens come up with comments negative towards operators, or negative towards drivers. But first of all, I would like to say as an employee, we're not just drivers, we're bus operators. The operators they're discussing are the 1% of the operators. I'm here to talk about the other 99% of the operators. The other 99% of the operators do their jobs well. We come out, we transport our passengers, we treat our passengers with respect. The operators that the passengers, the citizens are commenting on, those are the 1%. What I would like to ask the board to do is take some time out your busy schedule, come out and ride a Route 52, ride a Route 19, see what the other 99% are doing, see what the other 99% of your employees are doing, see how they're treating the passengers. Just remember that when a citizen comes up and comments on an operator, well, this operator was rude. Were they? That's 1%. You have 99% of the other operators out there that are excellent operators, that perform their jobs well. We ask you to take a time out your busy schedule. The next board meeting, ride the bus to the board meeting. See how the operators perform. Make your decision, make your mind up on those operators. Don't look at the 1% of the operators who may have some issues. Look at the other 99% of the operators who come to work every day, do their jobs well, perform their jobs to their ability, to show a positive light on PSTA. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bell. And I know, speaking for myself, here a week or two ago, I took most of the day and rode about 6 of the routes, and I am always amazed that the operators that I interact with are very respectful of the passengers, deal with some challenging situations occasionally with passengers that may present somewhat of a challenge, And so I salute all the drivers that we have, and I would note that I'm not sure that I would be able to do that job myself. So, thank you very much, Mr. Bell. Are there any other comments from the public? All right, thank you. First item of a report is an update from the Metropolitan Planning Organization. Our Vice Chair, do you have any comments to share with us today?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. We are fortunate as a PSTA board to have a seat at the MPO. We also have board members, Commissioner David Eggers and Councilmember Darden Rice from St. Petersburg, who also sit on that board representing their own municipalities and the county. So we have a very strong voice in working with MPO. We recently completed the director search for the PC. The new executive director is Whit Blanton. Whit has more than 25 years of experience in transportation and land use planning as a consultant, and has worked extensively with MPOs and as well as transit agencies like ourselves. So he's a very well-rounded person that I'm excited to get to work with. He will start in mid-June, and I'm pleased to say that Brad has already met with him to work with him on how our two agencies can work more closely together. In regards to the STP funding, the MPO will review a significantly revised PSTA request for funding at its May meeting after our board reviews and approves it, likely at our next meeting in April. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Are there any questions for members of the board? Our next non-board committee report is the MPO's local coordinating board. I understand that you did not actually have a meeting in the interim since our last, but do you have any comments that you'd like to share?
Thank you, Chairman. Our LCB board did not meet. However, tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock, a subcommittee meeting will be held here at PSTA, looking at issues that have come up and working on resolving some problems. So we will have next month some plans to present to you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next item on the consent agenda, including the minutes from the workshop on the 18th, the meeting on the 25th of February, and the bus shelter contract. Is there anybody that was from the agenda, from the consent agenda? Anyone from the audience? Not hearing or seeing any, is there a motion?
Move approval.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Are there any comments? First signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, that passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Next item is the action item, and the action here is to accept our audit from our external auditors. Mr. Miller, do you want to introduce Ms. Leonis, or?
Sure. I'll go ahead and introduce our Chief Financial Officer, Debbie Elias, who will introduce Ms. Laura Brock, the FY 2014 audit. I believe the full CAFR was a packet. You'll receive your own personal paper copy following approval today, next meeting.
Good morning. I'd like to introduce Laura Brock, who's a partner from Mayor Hoffman McCann, and Amy Varnum. They've done an excellent job again this year in reviewing our financial statements. As you may recall, last year we did our very first time ever CAFR. They helped us significantly getting through that process and allowing us to win excellence with that. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Laura Brock. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, on acronym alert, can we explain what a CAFR is?
Absolutely. CAFR is the Comprehensive Financial Report. Good morning, Chairperson, members of the board. My name is Laura Brock. I'm a partner with Mayor Hoffman McCann, and with me is Amy Varnum, the audit manager who's worked on the engagement. Debbie was alluding to the preparation of the CAFR, the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report, and last year you took upon yourself the undertaking of putting together a full CAFR with all the statistical information and submitting it to the GFOA, the Government Finance Officers Association, to in their award program. They have a Certificate of Achievement in Financial Reporting award program. Several of the other governments, municipalities, and counties that we audit get that award, and this was the first time submission. It's a very lengthy process, as Debbie alluded to. We were keeping our fingers crossed, but we spent a lot of time dotting the I's, crossing the T's, and you were awarded that certificate on your first time submission, which is outstanding, and we're very happy to have been a part of that. So you will be submitting that again. The award is only good for 1 year, and so you have to submit every year to continue that. But as I mentioned to the Performance Finance Committee, that I have other municipalities who are claiming they've gotten it 35 years in a row or 23 years in a row. And so you've got your first one, you got a long way to go. So anyway, I'm here to present the results of the audit. You do have a handout, but it was sent to you in your agenda packet, and we met with the Finance and Performance Management Committee on March 20th, and we spent quite a bit of time in detail in going over the financial statements, and we went through all the recommendations with that group, so we won't have to do that today. So turning to page 2, the results of the audit, we prepared a unmodified opinion, which is considered a clean opinion. That's the best opinion you can get from your auditor on your financial statements. Included in your CAFR is the management discussion and analysis, and this is just to remind you that that is unaudited. We do take a look at that and make sure the numbers agree, that that's prepared internally by management. The financial statements include the statement of net position, the statement of revenue, expenses, and changes in that position, and the cash flows. And then there's quite a few footnotes that are included in the financial statements, which are all required under the auditing standards. Following that, there's some required supplemental information, which is included in there, having to do with the OPEB and some of the other requirements. And that is the other post-employment benefits, and that's an unaudited section as well. And then this section, as I referred to earlier, with the submission, and that's also unaudited. But it's all combined in one nice package, and you have that. Turning to page 3, the other regulatory items, we are required, since the audit is performed in accordance with the auditing standards, but also in accordance with the standards, we are required to issue an independent auditor's report on internal control over financial reporting and compliance. That's also included in your financial statements. There is a schedule of findings and question costs. We had no findings or question costs relative to any of the grants that we had selected and tested in the current year. There's a schedule of expenditures of federal awards and state financial assistance and the related notes, which list all of the grants that you had received either from the feds or from the state, and that's required to be included in there. That's what we use. Our sample of grant testing is from that CFA, the Schedule of Expenditures and Federal Awards. There's also a management letter, which is included as required by the Auditor General, the state of Florida, so there's a lot of information in there that we're required to put in there. And there's a new report that's included, an independent accountant's report, which was required this year from the Florida AG, Florida Auditor General. It has to do with your compliance with the state statutes relative to your investments and your investment policies. In the past, there's just been a little blurb in the management letter addressing that, but this year they're requiring the auditors to issue a separate report letter on that. They're wanting us to take a harder look on that to make sure that your policy is in compliance with the Florida statutes. And then finally, we are in the process of completing the agreed-upon procedures reports related to your national transit data, the NTD report. That's been completed. We've provided management with a draft of that report, and they're in the process of finalizing that, so that should be able to be submitted once that's been approved. Turning to the next page, as far as the internal controls and the management letter comments, as far as following up from last year, we had no material weaknesses last year. We had no significant deficiencies, and we did not have recommendations that we had reported. In the current year, no material weaknesses and no significant deficiencies. We did have a non-compliance finding relative to the Department of Homeland Security relative to the situation with having to refund that grant money. As far as our recommendations, when we discussed with the Finance and Performance Management Committee, although there were no audit adjustments as a part of the audit, and that's a very good thing. That reflects on management that there were no audit adjustments that we, as the external auditors, had to prepare, had to make, and there were no referred to as past adjustments. So those would be adjustments that came up during the course of the audit that fell below certain materiality levels, and we would report those to you as well. However, there were 15 adjustments that were provided to us from management during the course of the audit. So we felt that because of that there could be an improvement in your financial close process. We talked about those adjustments. Some of those are pretty much control because adjustments pertained with the actuarial reports that you don't get until later. But there was a significant number of adjustments that were provided to us that dealt with your capital assets. And although you had a turnover in that department relative to fixed assets, it just appeared as if there was just a lot of cleanup and adjustments that were being done. And they were provided to us, like I said earlier. So they weren't items that we found as a part of the audit. They were just provided to us. It just made for a little more difficulty, if that's the right word, getting another adjustment, loading it into the trial balance, and adjusting our work papers accordingly. So we handled that, so we felt like in our discussion with the committee was that they could improve on that process. On the next page 5, this is a condensed statement of net position as of September 30. And here we can see your total assets, your liabilities, and your net position. I'll quickly try to go through this since we spent quite a bit of time with the committee on this. But you can see your total assets from $139 million to, decreased from $139 million to $128. It's about $11.2 million decrease, representing about an 8% decrease. And you can see from the line items that pertains to the receivable line item and the capital assets. Receivables, just to remind you, as a year ago, included in that number was about $5 million of a receivable that you were getting for the buses that you had applied for the grant funding. So we had booked that as a receivable in the prior year. The capital asset line item is truly a function of depreciation. So with all of those buses that you had acquired, they're now being depreciated a full year, and so your depreciation expense went up significantly, and thus that's offset against your capital assets. So your decrease in capital assets was about $7 million, and that's exactly, your depreciation was about $9 million.
Mr. Chairman?
And looking at the,
Could you just repeat the driver for the receivables?
the receivables decreased from $7.3 million to $3.2, and that was due to the fact that the previous year there was about $5 million in grant receivables for the Gillick buses.
Okay, thank you.
That was kind of like a one-time thing.
Thank you.
Sure thing. On the liabilities, your total liabilities decreased about $3 million from $15.4 million to $12.4, and that is also a function of the grants, the buses. So you see that your accounts payable decreased from $7.8 million to $3.1 million, and that's because about $4.5 million of that accounts payable last year had to do with some of the buses that you had purchased and acquired, but you just hadn't paid the bills yet. So those numbers are somewhat skewed. If you go back and look at your previous years for payables, in 2012 your accounts payable was about $2.9 million, and this year it's $3.1. So it's in line with that once we pull out that one particular number. The other increase was in claims and judgments. That went up about $1.2 million, and that has to do with increase in both your workers' comp and your general liability claims. And looking at your net position, you can see that your net position decreased about $8.3 million. Your invested in capital assets is the same number as your balance sheet item, so that's $79 million. And your unrestricted consists of 2 months of operating reserves, which for you is $11.1 million, and a $25.4 million capital asset replacement in other projects. So that's what's included in your unrestricted. Turning to the next page, this is page 6, your condensed statement of revenue, expenses, and changes in fund net position. And this is for the year ended fiscal 14, which ended September 30. You can see that your total operating revenues decreased about $680,000. It was about a 4.7% decrease, primarily in the fare revenues, and that had to do with the decrease. The decrease was due to the increased discounts that you had provided. So that decreased about 3.6%. In the expense area, total expenses increased $3.9 million. So you had a decrease in revenue slightly, but you had an increase in expenses by 5.8%. And some of that was in the administration and finance line item, which had to do with some wage fringe benefits and the claims liability that I spoke about earlier. So the claims liability increased and the expenses in that particular line item. And then, of course, depreciation is up as well, as I spoke about earlier. With all the new buses that you're now depreciating, we would have expected that the depreciation would go up. So your operating loss was $58 million this year versus $53 million, and then you get your other revenues, which supplement your organization. So you've got property taxes, operating grants, capital grants, your interest, and these other items. Your property taxes, you did have an increase in property values this year, so you had about $1 million increase in that revenue line item. The significant decrease is in the capital grants, which again has to do with those hybrid buses and the cutaway buses that you had last year, and that was about $14.5 million last year. So your total other revenues decreased. Your decrease in depreciation was $8 million this year, and if we pull out the capital grants and the depreciation, you ended the year at about $408,000. On the next page, this is the same information, but some folks, it's easier to see things in a picture than it is to see straight-up numbers. But we've provided 5 years of information to just kind of show you a little bit more. You can see what's happened to operations as far as the expenses. Your purchase, transportation, maintenance, administration, and finance had dropped, and it's kind of creeping back up. And depreciation, we would expect to see that number because of the continuing purchasing of those buses that you're depreciating. Next page is other revenues. Again, this is just to demonstrate what's happening with property taxes. We had the dip and then kind of back up, leveling off, and now we're kind of back on the upside. Operating grants have kind of stayed around the same for the last couple of years. Capital grants, of course, are going to jump based on the years that you get funding for your grants. On the next page, this is just information we pulled out of the statistical section, so if you did get a chance to read the CAFR, the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report, the MD&A has got a lot of good information and the statistical information in the back. Not that all the rest of it isn't good, it's got a lot of information, but to get to the quick and dirty, there's a lot of good information in there. So this is a property tax revenue for the last 10 years, and you can see our budget for next year is proposing a $35 million in property tax revenue, which would be a 6% increase from the prior year. So you're on the way back up, and that's keeping the millage rate at 0.7305. So you have not had a increase since 2012. Prior to that, your rate was 0.5601, and then going back to 2006, believe it or not, it was 0.6377. So it was at 6.3, it dropped to 5.6, you're kind of back up to 7.3. But your statutory limit is 0.75, and so you're not quite at that level. The next page is the fare box revenue ratio for the past 5 years. This is just information we thought that might be informative to you. This is your fare box revenue, and then the operating expenses, excluding depreciation, because depreciation is a non-cash item and is sometimes often skews information, but just wanted to see what the percentage was, and it's about 22% of that. So if you take your total expenses, which were $72 million, back out depreciation, which was $9.7 million, that gives you the 62 in your operating expenses. And on the last page, I just wanted to talk a little bit about what's coming down the road for next year under the Government Accounting Standards Board, which is the GASB statement that we have to follow relative to the financial statement. So GASB 67 was actually applicable this year. You don't have any of your own defined benefit plans, so that didn't affect you relative to any required disclosures. 68 will be implemented next year, so although you participate in the FRS plan, the Florida Retirement Services Plan, there will be additional disclosure that you'll be required to include in your financial statements, and FRS is very much well aware of that. They should be providing you with all that information that you'll be able to be required to put in the financial statements. GASB 69 is also be implemented next year. That won't affect you, nor will 71. Pension transitions for contributions made subsequent to the measurement. GASB 72, which is coming down in 2016, we don't see that affecting you as well. But the other one, which is the OPEB GASB statement, I talked to you a year ago, and at the time, it was still in its infancy stage, but the exposure draft has been issued. It was issued in May of 2014. The comment deadline ended in August, so in the fall, August of 2014. They're estimating to issue that standard in June of this year, June of 15. Basically, what they're anticipating is issuing a standard which would piggyback GASB 68, the pension plans, the defined benefit pension plans, but this would be just dealing with OPEB. So for you, with this GASB, and they don't have a number yet that they've given this statement, you will be required to record the unfunded, actuarially unfunded liability for your OPEB. In our case, is about $3.8 million. So that's just to prepare. A lot of the municipalities have been discussing this. This is just to kind of make sure, and I'm sure Debbie has been working with the actuaries as far as that information. I know I had 15 minutes. I tried to be short and sweet, but of course I'm available to answer any questions that you may have.
Questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There's nothing like an audit in the morning, and good news on this for the most part. Two questions on the DHS grant, and it's more for Brad, I guess. You had implemented a review and some other procedures to deal with that. What's the status of the review? And
Right, so following the return of the funds, we did complete a thorough review and presented that to the Finance and Performance Management Committee a couple months ago. Made some recommendations, some of which are included in an agenda item coming up here, your next agenda item, making some changes to the rules and regulations to better define the requirements on PSTA staff as far as transferring funds like we did. There were some other internal control changes that we made within the department as well. So that review has been completed. We're making some changes.
my second question is on the adjusting entries. Can you give us a little more detail on the number of adjusting entries and the reason for so many?
We had, there were 15 adjustments, as I indicated earlier. 3 of them were audit adjustments that came from the client, or claim from you, and then 12 of those had to do with reclass adjustments, or reclassifying things between different categories in different buckets. So as I indicated earlier, a significant portion of those had to do with capital assets, and then the other ones had to do with booking the actuarial liability change on your OPEB and your wages and your claims and liability.
And what is the concern? I mean, adjusting entries are pretty normal. Was this outside of what you normally would expect? Or?
We would expect to get the closed out books and trial balance and have no more adjustments after that. So the fact that we're still getting adjustments to me means that you're still closing out your books, and we would like you to get them closed out. Either that, or, and one of the questions that was raised at the meeting is, you know, how do we fix that? And I said, well, maybe we don't come in as early as we do to start the audit. Maybe we give you more time to clean out the books, but Debbie assured us that that was not the goal, and that the goal was they did have some turnover within the department relative to that position, and she wouldn't anticipate that we would be moving the start date of the audit field work.
Okay. So Debbie and Brad, y'all have a plan for that? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Vice Mayor Barkley, I'd recognize you for a report from the Finance Committee and a motion.
Yes, we did have a very thorough evaluation of the report, and after quite a few questions and obtaining satisfactory answers for the questions that were raised, we would recommend that the report be approved. I'd make a motion for that.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Question, Commissioner Newton.
Just good to see you again. Long time no see. I think it was Thursday. But and again, good work. That's what you did for the city of St. Pete. So, thank you.
Vice Chair.
Thank you. Just kind of dovetailing on Commissioner Welch's comment. Later on, I think we're going to have a discussion about the executive committee, but what I would like to do, if possible, is at one of the next executive committee meetings, I would like to review two things, and that is our grant policy and how that works internally, and the comment about the, we recommend that policies and procedures be implemented to verify that advertisements are properly reviewed for allowability, and so whatever that policy is, I'd like to review that as well at the executive committee. There's no purpose in trying to digest it right now, but I think it would be just good for the executive committee to just take a look at that real quick and see if there's any issues to bring back or assure ourselves that that's been addressed. Otherwise, thank you very much for your hard work.
Mr. Diamond.
Thank you, Ms. Brock, for your work on this audit. I just wanted to add that I think that it would be helpful perhaps to have our Director of Risk Management give us a little report on the claims process and how we're managing the claims process, because we've had an increase in workers' compensation and general liability claims. It looks like of over $1 million, and so she could do that in writing or in a formal report to the board, Brad, but I'd be interested in understanding that issue a little better. Thank you.
No other comments? Okay, we have a motion and a second to accept the audit. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Brock.
Thank you, Ms. Brock and Amy. The next item is also an action. I'm sorry, I failed to ask if there was anybody in the audience that wanted to speak to the issue of accepting the audit report. Is there anybody that wanted to make a comment on that? It was an action item. I don't see anybody, so I slipped through on that one, and we'll move on to the next action item, which is a resolution of rules and regulations. Just for a little bit of background, this is something we had talked about initially, I think in January. We were ready to take action in February. However, the document that was presented to us in February just was the as amended. It did not show the strike-throughs and the we now have that information attached to this agenda item. And additionally, there is a listing of the proposed changes. So I would ask if there's any questions from the board members on any of the amendments being proposed. Don't see any. Is there any comment from the public on this action item? Is there an amendment, or, is there a motion?
Move
So moved.
approval.
Okay, I'll take that as a motion and a second. Did you get those? Is there any further questions, comments? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right. Thank you. That item passes unanimously. The next item is beginning of information items, and this is a follow-up from the work session that we had on the 18th of February. And there's really 3 items here that we'll be going through. And I would note that we did not have the Transit Riders Advisory Committee speak at the very beginning of the meeting where they normally would, because their meeting was largely related to the third of these items, the route performance monitoring system and the samples as to how that performance monitoring system applied. And they had so much discussion about that, we'd like to have them come forward at this time. We start out really with a discussion that started at the Joint Planning Committee and the Finance Committee, where we talked about and heard from our executive about a path forward. What are the possible steps that we would go through? The Executive Committee also talked about this on Monday, and on Monday there was a presentation of the model that you have in front of you, which Mr. Miller will be going through. I would add that at our Executive Committee meeting, we also talked about the process to move through these items over the next several months before we come up to developing a budget for next year. And during that process, the Executive Committee said, okay, our basic role is to help the board make good decisions, to provide information they need so the decisions are and supports the board process. The Executive Committee doesn't make decisions for the board makes decisions. We and the Executive Committee help the board through that process. But in that process, especially as we go through here, how do we go through the next steps, the path forward? The Executive Committee recognized that we have three people that have been around for a long time, if I can use that term.
Forever.
and we said we probably would be more helpful in supporting the board process by having a newer board member appointed to the Executive Committee, which would make on the Executive Committee. And then we said, well, we really should have an odd number, so the suggestion was made to have the past chair also be a member of that expanded Executive Committee. And we wanted to present that today. For any comments that you had, the actual addition would be, we'd have to make an amendment to our bylaws, which the attorney would draft up and present at our next meeting. Of course, the Executive Committee meetings are open to any board member, and if we move forward with this, we would hope that the past board chair would join us for our next Executive Committee meeting, as any other board member could come in and join us. So that's kind of the introduction to this section and a comment relative to the Executive Committee. Are there any thoughts relative to that suggestion on the Executive Committee that you want to make, Mr. Scott?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think it makes a lot of sense. I mean, that's consistent with the way it's done with a lot of industry boards that I sit on. You know, to have the past chairman there to provide consistency and to get new board members in to kind of get them up to speed and sort of broaden the perspective. So I think it's a good idea.
All right. Other thoughts, comments? If not, we can move into the regular agenda item. Did you?
I was going to say, I also think it's a very good idea. It helps to deepen the bench of leadership on the board, and it's a great way to provide continuity by keeping our ex-chair the past chair still involved, and bringing new people on board. So I think this is a terrific idea.
All right. Thank you. With that, I'm going to turn this over to Mr. Miller. I would suggest as we go through these next three items, we ask questions on things that we don't understand or need clarification on, and not talk about really where we want to go until we've actually completed these three items and heard from the track committee. So if that's acceptable. Mr. Miller.
Good morning.
Morning.
Thank you to 11 of you, 11 out of the 15 of you who attended the combined Finance and Planning Committee last Friday and reviewed, and we went over these same presentations. So we'll try to be a little bit more abbreviated for those, but for those of you who weren't there, what we're going to do now is we have three information items in a row that tie together. First is sort of the plan, a recommendation on a high-level policy discussion that we would have first. Then you're going to hear from Debbie Leas, our CFO, about sort of our current financial forecasts for the agency for next fiscal year and beyond. And then third, you're going to hear from our planner, Chris Cochran, who's going to show you this new data-driven approach that we're taking to looking at the service and a route performance monitoring program that's driving some of our recommendations. So, again, these are information items. The idea, as Chair Johnson and the Executive Committee just described, was that we would have this slightly expanded Executive Committee lead the process and try to get going pretty quickly so that then we could have a board workshop. Not perhaps like a facilitated one like we had back in February, but a board workshop specifically on this high-level policy, which the one page is at your places with the triangle on it, and I'll just quickly go through that now. And what we're looking for here is an idea, and I think Commissioner Eggers mentioned this at the committee meeting. It's sort of a pause to PSTA's regular processes that we go through with the budget cycle and whatnot, where we're looking for a high-level direction, consensus on direction from the PSTA board. As we discussed on last Friday, for the last several years, the answer to the question, what was PSTA working on, was Green Light Pinellas. And although that was an incredibly complex plan and detailed plan, that was a very simple way of describing that we had a plan that everyone knew about. Since November, the question, what is PSTA working on, has been, I don't know, or an open question, and that needs some leadership now by the PSTA board, and that's why this sort of new process where the executive committee and reaches consensus first, and then working with the other committees of PSTA and then ultimately some workshops over the next couple of months, that we could together collectively have consensus on a new path forward, a new plan, not necessarily a 30-year plan like the Green Light Pinellas plan, but a shorter-term plan, but it would be something that we all know, we all buy into as this is what we are working on moving forward. And I'm now going to present my recommendations, my skeleton of a plan that I've given to you in a one-page graphical format there, but again, this is for information only for you, and we're going to have a workshop on this to kind of go into the details, if there are things missing or you need. That I think that's as the chair said, that's the sort of input we're looking for here. Again, this is not a replacement for the detailed Green Light Pinellas plan. This is, I'm envisioning and recommending that we look at a 2 to 3 year horizon for this plan. First and foremost, and it's at the top of the page on your sheet, one sheet there, is that we focus on our core services. PSTA is about moving people with buses, and we are focused on a customer-oriented bus service and making improvements every day. That also means that, at least for planning purposes, we are not focused on a new ballot initiative in 2016. However, number two is very important in that we commit ourselves, or my recommendation is that the board and the staff and we commit ourselves that we are looking to redesign the current system. We have developed, over the last several years, a community bus plan that had a lot of public input and it had a lot of discussion about redesigning the system to make it better, to make it straighter so people can get from point A to point B faster, to reduce the low ridership routes or empty buses, as some have said, reduce the number of those and take those unproductive resources and move them to where transit works best. same time, number 3 is an important factor. We, the PSTA board, commit ourselves to making the statement that we do not believe that doing nothing is in the best interest of the community that we serve. Looking at nothing but just going ahead and cutting the service by as much as a third is not in the best interest of the vitality and economic vitality of Pinellas County. And that we owe it to our constituents, the riders and non-riders, that we look at every single option that's out there, cutting expenses where we can, and looking at alternative revenues that are available to us. Number 4 and number 5 are tied together. We acknowledge that PSTA is probably the most significant issue looking out to the future is our capital program, especially our bus replacement program, and we commit to a sustainable bus replacement program. That means buying less expensive buses, smaller buses where we can, and perhaps even looking at different types of revenue to support that. We had a presentation last month at your meeting about our reserves, and thankfully we are in a strong position, having built up some undesignated reserves, and you heard a little bit about that in the audit. Some of those were planned for using during, if green light had passed, that we can now use, and I am recommending that we use those, since they are one-time funds, initially for bus purchases, for bus replacement purposes. This would be the first time, this would be a change toward a very long-standing policy that the federal government bought our buses. We would buy our buses, at least in the next couple of years, many of them, with local dollars, the reserve funds that we had built up. What this does is this buys us time as we look outward to other sources of funds for these needed bus replacements, like the STP dollars that we talked about last month. As we heard from the MPO, the problem with the STP is that it has impacts on other transportation projects in the early years. What the Florida DOT said, the longer notice and the longer they can plan for it, the more they can develop a multimodal transportation plan, and these reserves buy us that time. And I did get a chance to meet the new executive director of the Pinellas MPO, Whit Blanton, and he hasn't started yet. And he's starting to get up to speed. He understands this process of developing, having the MPO take that role as a developing the priorities on a multimodal transportation system for the county. Number 6 is worded carefully because it is obviously not as important as our core mission, or it is not the primary focus, but it is critical that while secondary, we still look to improve the transit system where we can. And we take advantage of opportunities that might exist to add services, high productive services where we can, as long as they fit within our overall transportation plan, as long as they improve the system. We owe it to our community to look at pilot projects like bus rapid transit lines, like improving technology on the fare collection system. Those are important. I know we had discussions at this board and also with the Riders Committee, the track, about, well, how exactly can you be looking for new stuff when you're changing your existing stuff? It's important that we do both. It is important that we justify our changes and justify these, make sure that we have the operating expenses, so if we receive funds, say for a new bus rapid transit, that we can operate it within our budget. We have a capital program, et cetera. But that we keep moving on that. We have a legislative agenda that we pursue each and every year. Number 3 is a long-range goal, that we set a vision for the agency. Obviously, it's not going to be done in the next 2 to 3 years, but it's a long-term statement that says that the ideals that were outlined in the community bus plan still hold true, that we believe the best system for Pinellas County, the best public transit system, is one that is frequent, that is straightforward, operates in a grid-like system across the county, and away from the current hub-and-spoke system. Sort of a visionary statement like that, and that each of these short-term projects or changes we make feed into that ultimate vision. And as it's shown on the chart that you have in front of you, the underlying pinning foundation of all this is a strong governance model of the PSTA board. Of the PSTA board and its committees, of its executive committee, the roles and responsibilities that you place on me as the CEO, and hold me and the staff accountable to implementing this plan once it's set in motion. That's all very important, that we take a proactive stance. I'm recommending that we go down this process first as a way to buy consensus where, understandably, there has not been that over the next several months since Greenlight. The idea is to move forward quickly on this, to be ahead of the budget process, which is required by law to move along on its pace, and that we would have an executive committee hopefully in the next month. So although the official rules and regulations are going to hopefully add, and you'll approve those at your next meeting, to add the fourth and the fifth members, certainly hope that the former past chair, Commissioner Welch, will join us at our next executive committee, and then we would set the motions in place to have the nominating committee, which is chaired by Mr. Newton, to be scheduled sometime in April so that we could appoint that fifth member as quickly as possible. And then we would also, that way we can schedule a workshop of the PSTA board, I'm hoping within the next 30 days, although Rachel is my partner in crime on that, and she might kill me. I'm not sure. I was trying to get 15 people to come to the same meeting. But the budget process is moving along as well. That's your next presentation as far as how that schedule is going to go. We follow the same process that cities and the county do as well, where we have to have a budget approved by October 1, public hearings in September, and the draft budget will be presented to you in June. So what I'm suggesting is this policy framework start ahead and be approved. Hopefully by your May meeting, we might adopt a policy. The budget process will start, but it'll lag behind. Same thing on the service. That work has already started. You're going to hear the third presentation about how we've already developed this data-driven approach to looking at the routes, and we are moving down the path of making recommendations, solid recommendations to you about service adjustments, looking at targeted areas of redesign, those areas where we are making changes to the routes or eliminating service because it's unproductive, that we do take a detailed look at what other options are there. We commit ourselves to always looking at what options exist out there. Maybe they're not PSTA services, but there are other services that people can take advantage of. And you'll hear more about that. Again, I understand that cutting or changing services to save money sooner saves more money than done later. But I'm recommending that it is so important that we take this time to do it right and to get the public input. We moved, as Chair Johnson said, we moved the track presentation that you normally hear at the beginning of the meeting. Elaine Mann is the chair of track. Those are all riders. Those are riders. They have to ride at least 3 times a week, so they're regular riders. When we presented this stuff to them now a week ago, they were into it. I mean, they are very focused on changes and the plans for the fares and those kind of things. So much so that when we started showing on as you saw, specific routes that they rode, they immediately wrote down all the planning department members, and they are calling them, and we are setting up individual meetings with them. They want to practically join the planning department and have input on that. So, which is excellent, and that's something that resources the board can really take advantage of as well. But what I'm saying at the bottom of my slide is very important. If we're not able to get consensus around these changes by October 1 within the budget, that's okay. It's better to do these right than and take some more time at it, because we have the ability of time within our budget to make sure these are well thought out. Last but not least is just the fact that the point I just made. It's called public transportation, and the word public is first in that word for a very important reason. This stuff does not work unless the public has bought into it. Commissioner Eggers pointed out that I think we have changed the culture of PSTA over the last several years through Greenlight to being much more focused outwardly on the effects of public transit and how we can help the community. But it's very difficult. It's very difficult to get the public to weigh in on this stuff until it's like almost too late. Until we have a plan to reduce services, then the boardroom fills up with people commenting. And we want to be mindful of those folks and have solutions or at least alternatives for them, but also working diligently with the track committee and reaching out into the community and presenting how the substance behind these recommendations, that we believe this makes the overall system better, and get buy-in from the community as best we can that these are improvements for the community. That's obviously probably the most important component to this whole thing. With that, I'll take any comments you had. Again, I would like to hear input that the board might have about this process of going through this urgent process over the next, say, 60 days to develop this high-level policy first before we make any final decisions. Commissioner Long?
Yes, thank you, Brad, for that very straightforward and thoughtful presentation. And I like the idea, and I like the suggestions that you've made, and I hope we can all agree to move forward with them. I think it will strengthen the board, and it will help to provide a clearer, straightforward path going forward. And I like the public input as well. That's really critical, especially on the areas that will be most affected.
Okay, other questions in general here, rather than, we don't need to pile on, but if you have the chair at this time, please do.
I'll just say that I support this direction. Talked about it at the joint meeting. Good positive direction, as Commissioner Long said. And I'd be happy to, if the board approves, rejoin the executive committee. I heard you say to keep it odd, so I think I can handle that. So I'm looking forward to it. I think this is a
Actually, the word was consistency, Commissioner.
He said odd. He said he wanted an odd number. So, but I look forward to this. This is a good path forward.
Commissioner Newton?
Yes, I concur. I think it's a great step to be proactive, especially as it pertains to cuts of services to people that need and depend on this. I think that's going to be huge. Obviously, I think a lot of it's going to be in the area that I represent. A lot of the people that depend, the only way they get around. And we need to be considerate and let them weigh in on maybe some solutions of if we have to move stops or whatever we have to do as it pertains to cuts. I think that'll be better being proactive rather than being reactive to be done something that we can't undo.
Okay. Seeing no other comments up, do you want to proceed to introduce, or are you going to do the budget presentation?
No. Debbie back here to walk you through, again, these forecasts for the next fiscal year budget.
Hold on.
Good morning again.
Morning.
We're going to take process, and we've done a few things a little differently this year. First thing, though, I just want to go through the timeline that we have for the budget process. We will be discussing today some of the key assumptions. Next month, we'll be talking about personnel. Personnel expenses, which consist of salaries and fringes, equals about 60% of our total budget, so it's a very important area that we'll be concentrating on next month, and in the following month, the capital plan. What I want to do is have before you in June the first draft of the budget. That allows the time over the summer months to review it, take a look at all the assumptions, come back with any strategic changes for staff to implement. And as we talked about, we will have the public hearings in September, so a lot of work needs to get done between now and then. One of the things that we have to have is, in my viewpoint, is a balanced budget that is consistent with the board's strategic direction and a multi-year plan. Something different this year that you have in your package or at your place settings is a booklet on key assumptions. Those key assumptions take a look at what has happened historically, what the current policies and assumptions are, and also look forward to future conditions. And we're going to be looking to that as we prepare the budget. The multi-year budget provides us with a couple key benefits. One is assessing the long-term financial sustainability of PSTA funds. Another is understanding the impact of today's decisions on the future and providing a holistic financial picture. In that booklet that we provided to you are many assumptions, but I'm going to concentrate on just a couple today. As we mentioned, we'll be looking at others going forward. I'm going to take a look at those that are a little bit out of the ordinary from the regular CPI increase, one of which is fringe
Debbie,
benefits.
I just see a question perhaps coming up from the left end of the table here as to what the booklet is. And I think what you're referring to
of your package.
is the thing that starts with this. And
Page 40?
Page 40. So, does that answer your question? Perhaps was.
And then for those members that were not at the Friday meeting, we made a paper copy for those members. But otherwise,
The key
it's in your
budget
packet on page
assumptions,
40.
right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Does everybody have one to take home?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Please.
Fringe benefits are, besides salaries, one of our largest costs. Fringe benefits account for about $11.2 million, or about 17% of our costs, the biggest piece of which is health care. Health care accounts today for about $5.9 million worth of PSTA's costs. And as you take a look at the bottom of this chart, you'll see that we've got the fringe benefits going up about 7% each year. The driving factor is health care. The driving factor behind that is medical inflation is going up between 9 and 12%. We will be taking a look next month at alternatives that we can take a look at to see what we can do to contain those costs without reducing benefits to our employees. One of the other areas is supplies. We've got supplies going up approximately twice the CPI in the future, and that's because of our aging bus fleet. Bus parts are the biggest portion of our supply line. The good news is we are preparing ourselves to take care of those buses for the maintenance as we try to smooth out our bus replacement plan. And I think the biggest challenge within those budgets in achieving those goals. In the multi-year operating plan that we have here for fiscal 16 through 20, if you take a look at the very bottom line, you can see we have for in fiscal 16 about a $1.2 million deficit. That takes into consideration not only our operating deficit, but the fact that we set aside funds in our reserves for 2 months of operating expenses. As expenses go up, so does the reserve. And you can see going out through the years, we've got that is increasing the operating deficit going forward. As Brad mentioned in his presentation, Staff is recommending that we use our reserves in the short term for bus replacement. It simplifies the procurement process, and it does not affect our ability to get federal funds in the future. We had a very good conference call with FTA and brought that up this week. Of course, that our needs are greater than even what the local funds can provide. So there'll be no negative implications there. However, we're still facing a $1.2 million deficit next year. And I think that PSTA can look towards strategic changes to bridge those operating deficits. We're presenting today just 5 key opportunities for policy change. Those include increasing the property tax to the maximum millage, which is going from .7305 to .75 mils, increasing the average fare, increasing advertising revenue by outsourcing, implementing administrative savings, and looking at service hour adjustments. If we were to raise the millage to the .75, the dollar impact on that in fiscal 16 would be $970,000, and it would grow from there. At our meeting last week, it was brought up that we have 5 communities that do not currently participate in the ad valorem tax for transit. And we took a quick look at what would the impact be financially if all of them were to participate, and it would be close to $3 million. So that is significant. The 2 biggest areas would be St. Pete Beach and Treasure Island, of course, both of which currently contribute to some of our trolley routes and our circulator routes. When we take a look at this, we are also looking at what the county does on their assumptions. When we looked at the numbers, and we back it off by the 0.2% because of those 5 municipalities that do not participate. In another area, Ernst & Young in their financial study that they did a few years ago made a recommendation that we look at our fares every 3 years. So we're suggesting that we try to achieve a 15% increase in the average fare. And whenever you increase average fares, you're going to lose some ridership. So the net effect that you're looking at is really about a 12.5% increase. Again, significant numbers. Service hour adjustments are the last area that we're looking at. And with a 4% adjustment, we would have approximately $1 million serve as a maximum savings in fiscal 16. And any of those savings would grow from there. In the next presentation, we'll be talking about whether we do eliminations, whether we take and redesign services, etc. And that will all have an impact on what the savings will be. But let's take a moment and look at what are all the different impacts, when you put it all together, of these 5 key strategic areas. Take a look at the bottom line in fiscal 16. If they were all implemented for that time frame, it goes to the bottom line of $3.8 million and grows from there. Now let's take those adjustments, those strategic changes, and let's take a look at the chart again and say, what impact does that have on our bottom line? Now we're no longer looking at a $1.2 million deficit in 16. We are looking at almost a $2.7 million surplus in 16, a $1 million in 17. That helps us carry us forward for the next 5 years of the plan. So what we're looking at then is a balanced multi-year operating budget, and we're looking for the reserves to help us with our much-needed bus replacement needs over the next several years. Are there any questions?
Questions?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
We discussed the potential impact of us funding some capital locally and if that would impact the federal funding, so I'm glad to hear FTA said it wouldn't. Can they give us that in writing?
Actually, they probably could, because
Okay.
our funding is based on formula funds. That formula does not,
It would
based on how we implement our capital plan.
just be nice to have an email or something
Okay.
in writing.
All right.
Okay. And on the fare increase, is TRAC going to speak to that? Was that discussed at TRAC?
Not the actual fare increase, no. So
Okay.
we're looking at increasing the average fare, which is a little different than just a fare increase. We'll be talking about discounts and fares, many different options.
But the cash fare is included in that.
Yes, it is.
Is TRAC going to talk about some feedback?
Yes, and as Commissioner Johnson said, the local coordinating board, the LCB that she chairs, has created a subcommittee that's meeting tomorrow. Tomorrow.
10 o'clock.
Specifically start looking at the transportation disadvantaged component to our fares, and I think TRAC will hear from that. There's some members of TRAC that are also involved in the TD programs. That's very important. Only thing we've done so far is come up with a model, an assumption based on the average revenue per customer increasing, and through a combination to be determined of changes.
Thank you.
Commissioner Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much, Debbie, for that informative presentation. As you go through the budget there, I would encourage you to really take a close look at the personnel side of that equation. Coming from the private side, where the personnel expense is typically 20-25% less than that, that number just causes me a lot of heartburn. So I just want to make sure that we have the right people in the right places, of employees versus busy employees. So.
I think that's well taken. When you can control 60% of your cost, you're controlling a significant number.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Anybody else?
Thank you for the presentation. I just had a question. You referenced that there are 5 municipalities that don't participate in the property tax. Can you provide a little bit more information or background? Or Brad, could you?
There's Bel Air Beach, Bel Air Shores, Kenneth City, St. Pete Beach, and Treasure Island are the 5 that do not participate, that they don't want, at this point in time, bus stops in their locations.
And I'll just add, they have never been, those 5 municipalities have never been in PSTA since PSTA was created 30 years ago. There's 25 more pages of history that Alan Zimmick could provide to you at your leisure.
Okay, thank you.
Suncoast Beach trolley that stops in their areas. Bel Air Beach, which is not in PSTA. The trolley goes right through and has no stops. So it doesn't pick up on Gulf Road in that city.
I was just curious as to, is the increasing of that service off the table? Or if it does, is the cost efficient? Does it cover itself? I mean, how does that work? I mean, they're not contributing to the ad valorem, so.
Well, yeah, the idea is that the incremental service, when the trolley bus hits the city line of is in their contract. They don't contribute to the capital cost of the bus. The idea, I think, and this has been going on for 15 or many years, the federal government in times past has bought every bus, so you know, the bus was covered, so they were just paying the incremental operating cost. Whether we want to take a new look at those contracts in a different way now that it's in a new situation,
right,
is probably.
And that's what I was alluding to. I mean, before with the federal government buying the buses and go out and try to get additional funds, and we're going to be proposing to max out the millage at 7.5. We have to look at all options. I mean, I don't think everything else. I mean, and you talk about fare increases. I don't know if this is why Pat's waving, but is the transportation disadvantage included in that fare increase?
We're going to be looking at anything we can do to help our average fare is what we'll be looking at.
Okay.
So we don't have anything specifically determined yet.
But I just want to make sure when you say everything, it means everything, not because we have contracts that have been in years. I mean, things have changed.
Vice Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In the last presentation of our path forward, lack of a name to call it, or whatever we want to call it. And at the executive committee, what we've talked about a lot is, and where I perceive that we're going, obviously no decisions have been made, is in our workshops coming up and discussions at executive committee level and in our other groups, we will be looking at all forms of revenue available to us in any way, shape, or form. Doesn't mean we're going to pursue them or not pursue them, but I think that is part of the path forward, even if it's not spelled out. That would include those 5 communities. How do they contribute, whether it's the hard way or the easier way? Hard way being getting them the ad valorem, and the easier way would be readjusting contracts and whatsoever. So I do believe that is the plan, that's part of our path forward. We're just not quite there yet. We have to decide kind of what is the program going to look like, what is the bus system going to look like, and how much revenue do we need to support that, and how other expenses that we're going to cut. So yes, I do believe that that's all going to be on the table.
Ms. Johnson, Commissioner, Vice Mayor Johnson.
Thank
Whatever
you.
you.
Thank you, our Chairman. I hate to keep going back into the olden days, but I know that as a child, I rode the bus every Saturday from Brightwaters Boulevard by Silas Dent down to St. Pete and back. And I know that people work for our family and our store and all of the motels and hotels on the beaches rode the bus from St. Pete to the beaches and back. So bus service in St. Petersburg Beach is a long-standing option for quite a few people, and I would not try to guess how many. But I know that St. Pete Beach and Treasure Island use the bus a lot. And I'm not talking about just the trolley, but we did have service. I haven't been out there on the bus in years, but we did have a lot of service.
Commissioner Drayton?
From what I understood in one of our presentations the other day, in order to get St. Pete Beach and Treasure Island and the rest of them onto our assessment, we would have to go to the legislature and get. So what we're talking about is going to the state legislature and having them completely control or reiterate their situation. And I would suggest at this point that that's probably not something that's going to happen. So I think we might just forget about that.
Can I ask our attorney to address the issue of how they would be included or why they were not included?
Yeah, brief history. The PSTA is as a result of a merger of the Central Pinellas Transit Authority and the St. Pete back in the early 1980s. The service that might have been provided to St. Pete Beach might have been provided by the City of St. Pete transit system in the 80s. But in 1980, when the Special Act was originally adopted, there was a process for determining which cities and unincorporated areas would join, and it required a referendum in each city and in the unincorporated areas. In addition to the 5 cities, there's some unincorporated areas that are not part of PSTA, including Tierra Verde. Those cities and unincorporated areas have never had a referendum to determine whether they're involved and be part of PSTA. The county commission would be the ones that would have to call a referendum in those unincorporated areas, and each city commission or city council of those 5 cities would have to call a referendum for consideration. When, whatever it was, 10 or 15 years ago, when the first idea of providing the trolley service to St. Pete Beach and Treasure Island came up, we provided that, PSTA provided that pursuant to a contract that was renewed every year, where the cost that was charged to them was reviewed and approved every year. When the board was expanded to 15 members and the additional county commissioners were added and the present makeup was approved, Treasure Island and St. Pete Beach originally objected to the change because they thought the part of the process at that time was to incorporate them into PSTA without that referendum. So this board at that time adopted a resolution indicating that they would not be moving forward and were not looking to incorporate St. Pete Beach and Treasure Island into the PSTA service area, which would make them part of the ad valorem. So that resolution is still on the books. That was done to assist in changing the board to the present makeup. In order for those, we would not have to go to the legislature to include any one of those cities. Initially, probably pursuant to the existing special act, have to go to the city councils or city commissions and request them to put on the ballot a referendum asking their residents if they wanted to be included in the PSTA service area, in which case they would be subject to the ad valorem tax and they would be able to be serviced as this board determined was appropriate for each community.
Let me recognize myself here briefly. It seems that the key here is to look at the cost allocation model that we're using today. Look at it as if it's fully absorbed, including fixed costs and variable cost burden allocation. I know when I rode the Central Avenue trolley, it spends a lot of time after it goes over the bridge into St. Pete Beach. So if we can get those fully burdened rates, considering the change in the way we pay for buses, I think that's very appropriate. The other thing that this leads to, and I would recommend, is that we look at our purpose in life so that we clearly articulate our purpose in life. Yes, we do have a social service aspect, but we also have an aspect that relates to economic development in communities. We also have an aspect that relates to congestion mitigation, which sometimes we don't think about. So to have a look at the purposes, why we exist, and how we support our communities, and be able to relate that to our partners or potential partners. And with that, I think Commissioner Welch had something he wanted to ask.
Well, Alan reminded us of the resolution, which you could argue whether that is binding to this PSTA board. I think we had that discussion.
Absolutely argue that point.
When we
and I wasn't saying it was binding. I wanted everybody to be aware of it.
But it's a good point. Every time, you certainly can make the moral argument that public transportation is just like public education. And just because there's not a school in Tierra Verde, they still pay the countywide school tax because it has a countywide benefit. From a equity standpoint, I don't know how you make the argument that those 5 areas plus the 2 unincorporated should be excluded from a tax that East Lake is paying, or Parkland is paying, or St. Pete is paying. On the other hand, the political reality is every time we brought this up, there's been a member of the delegation who said this has no chance of going forward. And if it requires a referendum in each city,
It'll definitely not go forward.
What even keep the service we have now without going through the fare increases and the property tax increases? We can't add new service. So how would we sell this to folks in Tierra Verde or St. Pete Beach? They're not going to get more service. They're going to get a new tax. So I think the moral argument could be made, but I think at least I'm in the zone of what is doable, and versus fighting this battle that we know at any point. So thank you for the recap on that. But it's in a standing inequity, and it's been that way for a couple of decades.
Commissioner Newton, and then let's see if we can go on to our final.
Kind of the ways you handle the inequities, Commissioner Walters, you make everybody feel the pain. If they don't want to be a part of that belong and you got to cut, well, you reduce service there too.
There's no
We-
surface there.
Well, I'm speaking on the ones where we, we have contracts at. Because we, as you know, we have, City of St. Pete provide water and sewage to some of the beach communities. And we just had a 25% increase that was passed on to the rate users, people that utilize the services, because of what we have to do in infrastructure that we pay the service at, because I don't think a sewage plant would be good on a beach. You know, so I understand that rationale, but we got sued up and down, back and forth, for pile off and pile on and you name it. It's just that when we were getting federal funds to help with the capital costs, it was no issue. You just pay for your usage and whatnot. Through Greenlight, most of the thing that was synonymous with the penny for Pinellas is that the tourists do pay a third of that. Well, when in absence of a tax where they and they utilize the service and that's their sole source of income, I think it's only fair. But you know, who am I? I would like to look at, you know, what the capital cost would be and spread it around. You know, maybe it might be cost prohibitive to be a part of Avalon, but you know, I just said the delegation meeting with your new administrator, and the whole thing was with Tia Verde was about fire districts. They were talking about the amount of money they pay in taxes versus what's given to them and what's ran out on Fort DeSoto. But the fact remains is you can't leave that bridge without going through St. Pete anywhere else. And all the services and everything they use are in St. Pete that the other people, but they only pay county tax. So I don't know. I'm just saying, you know, what do you put up expensive toll bridges or gates or whatever?
Thank you.
But what I'm saying is we have to find a way with today and going forward. I know it used to be, but it's not that way anymore.
Thank you. I know Commissioner Rice wanted to say something. I'd like to move on through the final presentation and hear from TRAC, and then go into more detail. So
It's just information. Debbie, how much ad valorem revenue would be recovered if we had those 5 municipalities?
About 2.9 million.
Which is about twice as short.
Does that include Tierra Verde, Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, I did mean to include Tierra Verde, sorry.
I think the number's higher.
It would be for the 5 municipalities, about 2.9 million. And about from Treasure Island, 1.6 from St. Pete Beach, and the other 3 communities is a couple $100,000.
What about Tierra Verde?
do you have Tierra Verde?
Don't have Tierra Verde right off the top of my head.
So it's higher, so it's an even higher number. There you go.
Thank you. But let's move on, if we could, now to the final segment, roof performance monitoring system. I think, as I understand this is a demonstration of a tool and how that tool might impact some routes. It is not a hearing on those specific routes today, but rather we're looking at the process and how we apply the process using a few routes that are specifics.
Thank you, Chairman, for clearing that up. My name is Chris Cochran. I'm a senior planner in the planning department. I'm going to, as Chairman Johnson mentioned, I'm going to present to you staff's product here, if you will, of the service performance monitoring system that we have developed really as a tool for you as the decision makers to use moving forward in helping you to make the best decision with the best data possible. So really as a resource for you moving forward. We have presented this to TRAC. We have presented it to the combined finance and planning committees last week. As some of you here saw, it was very well accepted at both of them. It sparked a lot of really good discussion, which is good. That's kind of the hope out of this. So let me move forward, and for those of you who haven't seen it and understanding it. We're going to present the methodology behind it, some of the results that we have produced, and ultimately an example several examples of how we use it, how we would like to be using it to create staff recommendations for routes. In this particular case, what you're going to see are examples that you have seen reflected already in the realignment scenario option 1 that was presented to you on February 18th. So starting with the goal of this tool here is ultimately, as Brad had mentioned in his presentation, really to identify these targeted areas for redesign. With that goal, the underlying objectives here are to identify these high-performing routes, and understanding what it is about these routes that make them high-performing, so we can apply those principles to those that we have identified as low-performing routes. In those low-performing routes, we have identified some categories that sort of guide our recommendations for actions, and I'll get more into those later. And thirdly, an objective is really if we do recommend a redesign or some kind of reallocation or redesign of routes, we have a tool to be able to plug that into a rider estimation tool that will give us the numbers we need to be able to put that redesign back into this performance monitoring tool and see how it would perform today against the same routes that it was originally designed to be measured against. So the methodology, the principal steps in this are made up of 2 screens. We have a performance screen, which is a strictly quantitative analysis, and we also have a second screen, which is very qualitative. And that I will speak more about that after I introduce you to the first step here. So this performance screen is really is made up primarily of observed data that we collect on a daily basis. It's aggregated monthly, it's aggregated to a fiscal year. In this case, this tool was used with data that is aggregated from the entire fiscal year 2014. And the primary data that we use are ridership that we collect both at the fare box as well as through automatic passenger counters. We have a cost that is provided by finance that allows us to obviously calculate how much money it is to run the buses hourly out on the road, and then our cost recovery. What's our observed collection at the fare box? So using these data, we have developed a scoring system using 2 criteria of passengers per revenue hour and cost recovery. And these 2 criteria are really a standardization of the data that we are using to monitor the performance. And that really allows us to compare apples to apples. We're able to compare the 444 to a huge route like the 52 or 19. So the way the first step works is that in looking at the passengers per revenue hour and the cost recovery, we felt it was important to weigh performance based on ridership as well as performance based on a financial metric equally. So with that, that's really the gist of the passengers per revenue hour, meeting that performance 50% weight, and then the cost recovery being that financial element. So we run it the same way in two different steps. The first step we do is we score it based on every route compared to every other route in the system, regardless of whether it's a contracted Jolly Trolley, whether it's a flex route, whether it's an express route, doesn't matter. We put them all together and we rank them based on the scores that come out of the passenger per revenue hour and cost recovery. We then do it again, and we have developed categories where we're able to really look at the 3 flex route connectors. How do they measure up against each other? How do the 4 contracted Jolly Trolley services measure up against each other? And then how do the express routes measure against each other? And then we have the remaining 34 or so local service routes, which are, the 52 and 18, the 19, those routes. So what we do is we combine these scores and we take an average of the two ways that we run this data, and that gives us a standardized score out of 100, and it really allows us to provide a nice, easy way to look at it, and you'll see the results here in a moment.
Chris,
Yes,
before
sir.
you go on, I'm confused on this chart.
Yes, sir.
The weighting component.
I know you asked me this before, and I just finally figured it out. what he's got there is the first bullet says weighting. 50% of each of the two scores is performance and 50% is financial. And then the combined score is based on that 50%, half of it is system-wide comparison, and half of it is service type.
An example? Is there
I
an
don't-
example to walk us through that, maybe?
Sure, let me walk you through real quick the system score. So.
Well, wait a minute. The big bullets, weighting or combined score.
Okay, the weighting is really, it's just, it's letting you understand what the relevance of the passengers per revenue hour and the fare box recovery that you see in that chart. The 50% performance is the passengers per revenue hour. The 50% financial is the fare box recovery.
Okay, I understand that. What's the difference between the top and the bottom?
Okay, the top really speaks to the far left, the passengers per revenue hour and the fare box recovery. The combined score is where we take the average outcome of running this tool with all the routes against every other route, as well as each route in its own category, so just the flex connectors, just the express routes, just the Jolly.
I guess I'm still struggling, but I can get with him offline.
Yes, sir.
Does anybody else on the board have questions relative to that? Otherwise, we can go on to the next page.
I'd like to come back to it later, too,
Okay.
Maybe you can give us an example, not
Absolutely.
today,
It's a complex
maybe
process
you
that would
can
take some time that I could.
give us
be
a
more than
couple of
happy
written
to walk you
examples
through.
via email or something, so we can see how it works. A good route versus maybe a not-so-good route.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay.
Excellent. Thank you, Vice Chair.
So from this, we're able to identify more of our low-performing routes, and the idea in step 2 is to, we understand that routes are performing poorly with ridership and cost recovery, and identifying what the next step is and whether we are going to look at possibly eliminating a route. Are we going to look at combining it with others? It's important for us to keep that mission of public service in mind in the second step, and that allows us to take a qualitative approach in analyzing, who is this route serving? Is it a primarily low income? Is there a lot of zero vehicle households? Is there some performance history issues? That will be a second step in evaluating what will be the best step moving forward, because it's important for us to know if we're eliminating a very high activity area access to it, that needs to be taken into account, which I think all of you have and spoken to today. On the bottom there, we sort of built this second step in the vision that you had at the February 18th workshop in this continuum of, are we a public service currently, or are we an economic driver? And while we are both, I think we can see it definitely weighed more heavily towards the public service side, and that speaks to the importance and support of the second step, and that being a part of the evaluation process. So once we establish our low-performing routes, what are our options? And staff has developed 3 primary categories that we are recommending putting low-performing routes either into or some combination of possible steps in moving forward in making a decision on what might be the best future for a route. The first one would really be more relevant to some of the newer routes. Is there a possibility of improving branding, some marketing? It's just a newer route that we feel might need a little more time to mature, that we can put a reasonable investment in, that we would expect to see a good return on increased ridership and access to. Research and redesign, this one is much more involved, and this dives into really getting the public involved. This would be a very important step in getting rider surveys, going out, getting people's understanding who the people are riding it, where are they going, is this route that they're riding that we're looking to change, is their final destination on this route, or is this just a route that they're using? somewhere else ultimately. And that really holds us to making sure that we keep providing the access necessary to where riders are going. And of course, the third and last one is one that, we don't want to do if at all possible, kind of a last resort, but it has to be an option that's on the table. Is the best option for us to eliminate and reallocate those resources. If we can eliminate it and reallocate those resources somewhere else that it's going to provide better access, better ridership to more people, that might be the best option. And that, we have to keep in mind that might be the best step. So here's the results from the scoring system that I presented before. And this gives us a nice, it's standardized so that the final score is out of 100. And it gives us a nice, easy visual understanding with that balance of ridership and financial understanding of the performance of our system. We see what we would expect, a nice concentration of the core routes towards the top, which supports our idea of reallocating resources that might be available back into those high-performing routes to support more ridership. But we also do see a very distinct cluster of poor-performing routes on the bottom, which, that is the trigger for us to evaluate those routes in that the first step, moving to that screen 2 of evaluating the qualitative value routes and what might be the final recommendation in moving forward. So I'll give you some examples here. And again, these are reflective of the realignment scenario option 1. These are just a few examples, so you kind of get an understanding of how we came up with these staff recommendations. First and foremost, 4. This without a doubt, in all scenarios, our worst performing route in the system. And if you look at the top here, it's pretty clear as to why. It's almost 2-hour frequencies, it's odd times. It's a very not efficient configuration. It's difficult for people to ride, and people often get confused on it. Our recommendation for this in moving forward and kind of doing some research into it is to eliminate this current configuration and look at the possibility of reallocating those resources still back into that Pinellas Park area. The 19 and the 52 run right through the middle of this Route 444 configuration. So this would be a good example of if we were to eliminate that configuration of the 444, we could reallocate those resources right back into that same area, but do it in and being able to provide longer hours, more frequency, and ultimately more accessibility for the people in that immediate area. But also, we need to research the potential for other opportunities. As Brad had mentioned in his presentation, are there outside funding opportunities that might be available for something that PSTA might be able to partner with to make something better in that area?
Excuse me. On your chart, you've got this scale on the side, 0 to 100.
Yes, sir.
Are you just talking about 100% utilization, or what?
It is the... This could be better explained when I'm able to provide you a better detail of how the scoring system works. But ultimately, in the 2 ways we ran it, the highest score in 1 is out of 50, so the highest performing route got a score of 50. Everything below it is a proportion of the performance of that highest route. The same with the way we ran the category, the routes within their category. So when we combine them, it's out of a score of 100. It's just, we made it a score of 100 just because it's a logical way to look at it. It's just something we all understand. Scores out of 100. It could have been 300. That scoring number was arbitrary, but it was the proportion of how routes performed against each other is consistent. You can assign that value either way, and I think this is where it gets a little complex. But with some time and email, you should be able to understand how that scoring worked.
So Route 62 either gets a C- or a D+.
Pretty much.
Okay.
The next route we looked at was the East Lake Connector. The East Lake Connector has been a very poor performing route since the very beginning. We haven't seen any growth since its initial little boost in riders when it first came out. This is an example of one that we would recommend for elimination, a reallocation of funds. We don't see research into the route and the area it's serving. We don't see a scenario where investing money into better hours, better frequency would give us any reasonable rate of return on that investment for that area. And those funds would be better served in perhaps as part of the funding comes from an FDOT grant, the possibility of taking those funds and putting it into some other regional express, because those funds are specific to regional express. And that route connects in Tarpon directly to the Pasco system. So could we also look at increasing frequencies on the Oldsmar connector? And that's where looking at how they rate in their categories was important for us to do. We know that the Oldsmar-Tampa connector was the highest performing. So if we were to take money away from the lowest performing connector, it would make sense to possibly invest that in the highest performing flex connector. So those are, that's kind of an example of how we would make the recommendations on an approach to reallocate those funds to better performing routes. The Route 1 and 30 speak directly to the community bus plan recommendations. And this is one, these were two routes that serve an important connection between Gateway and Tyrone Mall. We see a lot of direct ridership between them. But looking at the surveys that were done, we're seeing that not necessarily those are final destinations for people. And then looking at other models, the regional demand model, the place where people ultimately want to go is downtown. And we looked into kind of validating the recommendations of the community bus plan for this corridor, and they recommended combining these two routes, and instead of going Gateway Mall, to combine their resources, run it all the way down to downtown St. Pete. And looking at the research and redesign option of this, that really appears to, our research definitely supports that option. And again, it's validating what we have done in the past for the community bus plan.
Question.
Okay.
Is that because all the buses are in William Park? Is that why everybody wants to go downtown? If that had nothing to do with it?
Well, I think it's a variety. There's a lot of obvious growth and redevelopment for downtown St. Pete as an attractor for a destination of not only work and employment, but for living. And, you know, it's important to keep in mind, this corridor also serves, there's a large portion of this corridor moving north and south between Northeast Shopping Center and downtown St. Pete that serves a significant zero-vehicle household and low-income population as well. So, you know, for those people to be able to have access to services that might be downtown St. Pete, you have the hospitals, you have a lot of, and again, a lot of connections to other services that might be available.
Well, we have two downtown core also. USF St. Pete, 6,000 students, and then St. Pete College. So, and it was just right abuts Williams Park.
Yep. Two more examples here. This one, Route 58 that runs the Bryan Dairy Corridor. This again was another recommendation in the community bus plan to eliminate. This is also an example of a historical route that's been cut over time. And when looking back at when the cuts were made, the socio and economic situations that exist in that corridor today, this is another example of not see the value in putting an investment into better hours or bringing it back to service that it was at before its cuts. And this would be a recommendation for elimination of this route and reallocating those resources into some better running routes. But also part of this research, we're looking at what are some of the destinations if we were eliminating them. The St. Pete College Seminole campus here. We have well over 80% of the UPass users for our UPass program are St. Pete College students. And Seminole campus is a significant portion of those. And 58 currently serves it, but we see the option of rerouting the 18 feasibly to be able to serve that. And ultimately, that's giving students better hourly service and ultimately later hours as well, as 18 is a very well-performing route. And being able to reallocate those resources into a route like that to serve that big part of that destination is a key component to making this a feasible recommendation. The last one I want to give an example of is a redesign and kind of a branding improvement marketing option. This is the Jolly Trolley coastal route that runs Clearwater, Dunedin, Tarpon Springs. While the Jolly Trolley itself doesn't have the greatest performance numbers, we see a great deal of that again is supported by, yes?
Could I take full exception to that comment? You are comparing a 3-day-a-week route to a 7-day, so I'm giving you a hard time. I'm smiling when I say that. So in the scoring metrics, you're comparing apples and oranges. But
Well, again, this is provides us an example of trying to understand the scoring metrics.
because
and
that
maybe
thing is
would-
full impact when it's riding.
And it's a hell of a party vehicle in parades.
Folks, I'd really like to get through this.
I know,
have the
I'm
track
sorry.
Come forward and then have our conversation.
I'm sorry.
Come on.
Sorry.
But this goes right in line with the bus plan recommendation, and that's the combination. That's to look at combining the existing 66 that runs in that corridor with the Jolly Trolley services, combining those resources to be able to provide a 7-day service with better hours and better frequency in that market. And that's certainly and look at ways we can improve our marketing out, as those are high tourist attractions. So this is an example of how we take the approach of understanding and addressing the market in which it rides to make that recommendation. So that is that's the end of my presentation on the tools. We want to get Elaine up here, and then we'll have some questions afterwards.
Great. Please.
Good morning.
Morning.
Mr. Miller, and esteemed board members, the Transit Riders Advisory Committee met on Tuesday, March 17th. The meeting opened with the introduction of our newest members of the committee. We welcomed Dennis Davis as the alternate for North County, Miranda Douglas as alternate for Mid-County, Catherine Baranowski as alternate for Carson Zimmer as alternate for Professionals, Christian Smith as alternate for Student Riders, and Sunny Flynn representing the beaches. Mr. Miller presented the work program schedule currently under development, sharing much of the information that's been presented to the board and discussed at committee levels. These details include developing a plan that streamlines service while carrying out the PSTA mission of providing safe, affordable public transit to our community. During the presentation, emphasis was placed on the important role that track plays in informing the board and staff of rider perspective and the steadfast initiative to deliver adequate services that meet the PSTA's guidelines. Chris Cochran, PSTA Senior Planner, followed Mr. Miller's presentation with an explanation of the route performance monitoring system that you just heard about. This model allows the planning department to examine the effect of changes to the current service frequency and routes. Planning is actively underway to realign the underutilized routes and provide fiscal alternatives that won't significantly reduce or eliminate transportation services. Members of the TRAC, as was mentioned, commented in detail on all or almost every one of the proposed route adjustments in Chris's presentation. The committee strongly requested that as regular riders, the Transit Rider Advisory Committee be given every opportunity to help guide the service changes before they are implemented. Discussion ensued regarding the effect of these changes in areas where many rely on public transportation as their sole method of travel. Significant changes to these routes could severely impede the ability of our county's population to travel to work sites, access health care, and overall just function on a day-to-day basis. Further, committee members were concerned that changes to particular routes may impede the ability to connect to core routes, such as US 19 North and South. We strongly feel that rider surveys need to be facilitated to determine usage and final destination of general ridership, and that scheduling is of particular importance as changes are instituted to ensure that connections can be made from route to route and to important activity centers. And finally, bus rapid transit was recommended as a way to alleviate some of the issues that we're currently facing, such as transportation from the airport to the beaches or from the south side to work facilities such as on Clearwater Beach. Of utmost concern to the committee is that we not eliminate the opportunities that Greenlight Pinellas would have afforded us without determining if there are alternate ways that they can be instituted. Detailed questions were raised regarding specific proposed changes, some of those that Chris just showed you. Mr. Cochran and Ms. Cassandra Borchers, the Chief Development Officer, assured the committee that the planning is in preliminary stages and that track input will be sought regarding changes that may be instituted as they develop. And as Mr. Miller said, additionally, track members were invited to contact Chris or Cassandra directly to address recommendations regarding specific routes of which they may have more knowledge. The Transit Riders Advisory Committee will meet again on April 14th at 4 p.m. That's a Tuesday. I urge each and every one of you, if you can, to attend the monthly track meetings. If you're not able to attend, we now are live streaming the meetings, and the video is also available online that you can actually review the discussions that went on. And I would really encourage you to do that because it gives you a lot of the feedback that we offer and gives you an opportunity to discover the valuable input the committee is providing to each and every one of you during this time of considerable change.
Questions for the chairman of our track?
Hi. So, in your discussions, was there an agreement on the scoring process?
We didn't go quite in depth into the method as you guys did today, and it was interesting to me to see those questions because I had some of those same questions that you did. How, especially what you said, how do you compare the Jolly Trolley that runs 3 days a week and to only certain areas to something like the 78 or the US 19? And if I'm not mistaken, is that part of the weighting process that you do in that tool?
Yes, as far as the
You need to come forward to the microphone.
Can you repeat the question again, just so I know that I'm answering it?
Well, it was her question. I didn't ask the question.
She was talking about the Jolly Trolley, and whether we had questions regarding the method and the tool that we used. And I said that I agreed with her question on the Jolly Trolley only being a 3-day-a-week. How do you compare that to a 78 or a 19? Is that part of that weighting process in that tool?
Well, the way in which the data is standardized is by passengers per hour and the cost associated with it. So whether it runs 7 days a week or 1 day a week, the metric is passengers per revenue hour, and that's that's the way that we can sort of standardize how we're evaluating it, is whether, regardless of how many days it's on the road, when it is, how many people are on it at any given time. And then the cost is the cost associated with it operating as an hourly cost goes into that cost recovery. If it's less to run a Jolly Trolley, which I believe it is significantly less, that's the amount of revenue we're getting in divided by that hourly cost of it. That's how that is standardized.
To some degree, but I don't want to get off in the weeds. So back to the track, I wanted to find out if, where you all stood in. Okay, so you're saying you didn't make a complete vote or consensus or recommendation on the scoring process.
On using the tool itself, no, we did not. It was not an action item.
Okay. Is that something you will discuss further?
I think we would like to see the same presentation that it sounds like you guys are going to get, so we have a better understanding of how those tools are being used and applied in order to determine these decisions, certainly.
Just speaking for myself, the policy issue is how the ranking system works, not necessarily the application. If we get the right formula, then it's easier to apply to multiple. But I'm with the Vice Chair in saying we really need to know how that ranking system works. And Commissioner Welch, did you have a comment on that?
I just wanted to thank, and she's got the perfect chairman for input of the track. I mean, it's vital to what we're doing.
Yes.
I mean, these are the folks that ride it every day, and all your points were well stated. I think it's crucial that we have their involvement going forward. And I know we're not talking about specific routes, but they've already identified some issues in terms of, you know, if you eliminate a route and that was used to transport a route that's more heavily used, then what alternatives are you providing for those folks to get to that ultimate core route? So I think it's just very vital that they stay in the loop, and we certainly appreciate everything that y'all bring to this. And I do are going to weigh in on the fare issue as well. Okay. At what point will staff have, I mean, these are draft cuts, or are these actual routes? Are you making the recommendation now, or when will you make the recommendation for the routes that will be eliminated or modified?
This is the output of this quantitative data model that highlighted the low-performing routes. Chris's presentation shows that we have looked at those and make various recommendations based on those. They're not recommendations at this point. However, back at your February 18th workshop, there was maps in the middle of the room, you recall, that do tie to these outcomes. So there is some connection to that. But again, we just had our first meeting with TRAC, so they're just weighing in on it. And
well, would you say sometime later this summer? I'm just trying to get a time.
This summer. I would say this summer. Again, like I said, theoretically, some decisions could be made in time to be included in the budget for next year. But if we're not ready for
okay, thank you.
Commissioner Drayton.
In the previous thing that we got from Commissioner Elias, the service hour adjustments for 2000 are going to be $1,362,000. And in the recommendation that we just saw from Chris, we've talked about eliminating some of these routes, but also then reallocating the money into something else. And I'm wondering, we've eliminated, but then we're reallocating the money. So how does that affect the $1,362,000? I mean, it sounds like we're taking some money away, but then we're reallocating it. So what's what?
Mr. Dayton, that you are correct. That budget assumption is $1.3 million in net across the entire system savings. Any reallocation to new services would dip into that estimate, but it's an estimate now. The changes that Chris talked about reallocating, changing the routes, have already been factored in. So when he says reallocation of the services, obviously even that $1.3 million would be reallocated to the PSTA budget.
So we're not really taking out the $1.3 million. I'm just saying
that is an assumption on saving an option to save $1.3 million to theoretically balance the PSTA budget. But the PSTA budget would still operate the services, and essentially the remaining dollars allocated based on some of the recommendations that ultimately get approved by the board that Chris presented.
Okay.
Others on my right, others on my left.
Scott. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Brad, quick question on that. That evaluation process there. Is that something that staff developed internally, or a very standard way of doing it?
I would say it's fairly standard. I mean, that idea of looking at the productivity of a route and the cost recovery is very standard. That's what we did in Charlotte and other places I've worked. You know, we looked at this in a number of different ways. There's a number of different ways to run the model. You know, one thing that we did, but we didn't show you, is looking at the all other revenues that we receive, the partnerships that we have, like Peak Beach, Treasure Island we talked about, like up on the Jolly Trolley services that we get funding from other partners like Dunedin, Tarpon Springs, etc. That wasn't included in the scoring. And so there's a lot of different factors that we've taken into consideration that I would say are unique to Pinellas and what we're doing here, but the basic components are standard.
Right. Okay. Thanks.
Ms. Rice.
Thank you. This comment is for Chris Cochran, and getting a better handle on the methodology notwithstanding, I would also like to get a sense, and I appreciate the provided and the analysis for how we address the lower ranking routes, but I'd also like to figure out how we could look at some of those mid to slightly higher than mid routes and figure out what we can do to make them get more bang for our buck. Like if there are ways that, I mean, because those are high performers or have a potential to be higher performing, so I would like to see how we can address the routes at the other end of the spectrum as well, and that would be a place where maybe we would look for efficiencies. You know, I don't know, but it seems like we're getting a higher return on investment for those routes. Thanks.
Anybody else? I think the other piece that sort of goes along with that is different than the community bus plan. I know it's aging out, but we did spend a lot of money on the community bus plan, so let's make sure we don't ignore that. Perhaps we can build that into our model somehow as well. I think Commissioner Holmes' comment about on a scale to 100, it sort of says that we're 50%, which isn't even a passing grade. It's just kind of the appearance of the number as another comment. So beyond that, anything else on the service performance monitoring questions? So we've got some work, provided some helpful input to you and staff, and so with that, if there's no objection, we'll go on to the performance report updates.
I thought we were going to talk at the end of this about the whole thing. I thought that's what you asked us to do.
I'd be very... Go ahead.
Well, I mean, I don't want to change the way you're doing it. I thought
no, I just thought we had completed it, and...
No, I held off my comments. I asked questions, but I held off my comments because...
You are recognized.
Okay. So we talked about the path forward, the budget assumption, performance system, and while we may not have all of our questions answered about every piece of this, I see a sea change in how we're approaching all of this, and I am happy with that. I think we started in the beginning of this year, at least I can speak for myself, walking out of the workshop, I felt my head was spinning. I felt a little frustrated. I didn't feel that we were maybe all on the same page and that we needed some guidance. And I said as much to Brad that with Greenlight, we had a path, a mission, and we were all working towards one mission, and we were all more or less on the very same page. And then we didn't have that anymore. And so I feel that this all of these things together are coming to that place. So I want to thank Brad for kind of rethinking the way things were being approached and coming up with those ideas. And I still think it needs to be honed a little bit more tighter, so that when someone asks us, so what is PSTA doing? What are they working towards? In one instance, we can describe it. But I think that this is a good step forward, so that's what I wanted to say.
Other comments?
Mr. Chair, I would just concur with the Vice Chair. Had a early discussion at the joint meeting, and I won't repeat all of that, but I think this is a positive step forward. You know, it's a transition from 5+ years of green light and all the boards that met before that. I can't even remember some of the names now. PMI and others that morphed into that, but this is back to our core mission, and I do think it's important that we keep the elements of the community bus plan and implement those as we can fund it or find partnerships to do that. And I'll just mention Commissioner Long is on her way back to Tallahassee as we speak to try to work on some of those partnerships, but I agree with the Vice Chair on the path forward.
Other comments? I see some nods, but no other comments. Thank you for this discussion. I'd just like to thank staff for moving us forward on this. And again, this is part of the governance process where the board as a whole can be engaged and understanding and in the path forward. So thank you. So with that, I guess we'll go to the next agenda item, which was the reports and correspondence, the performance updates. Mr. Miller.
Mr. Chair and members of the committee, attached in your packet are two reports, the monthly performance reports, highlighting that we again had a very good ridership month in the month of February, a record for the month of February. I will point out down in the middle of the page, we need to take a look at, I do not believe that the year-to-date numbers on the transportation disadvantage are accurate, because they look like they're only maybe two months worth. A very large increase on page 68, on page 68 of your packet. So we're taking a look at that. But again, what's in your packet are the ridership data, some other statistics that we present every month, and then I will point out on the second report on page 73 is a capital projects report that the Finance and Performance Management Committee reviews, but it's a nice status report of the capital projects underway at PSTA and sort of their at least financial status and where things are at. And then there's a more detailed report that I think was a link online that you can find out about any of the projects in our CIP and where they stand. And that is a report, that's one of the several reports that the Finance Committee reviews quarterly. They also, to Mr. Diamond's comment, look kind of a risk report on that, an investment report they look at quarterly, and they have like a calendar, and then those get reported up to the PSTA board. Just I'll just keep talking. Again, on your packet is future meeting subjects, and I put on there, that again, the goal would be to schedule 1 or 2 workshops at PSTA. That would be in April and May. We don't have those scheduled yet, but in advance of those, probably an executive committee meeting to plan those out and flesh out, or as Vice Chair Bujalski said, hone or tighten the presentations. Again, you kind of see that we put on there the budget process will move forward, but trying to weave all these together. Heather Sobush in our planning department has developed a very detailed schedule, all of these things in their own path. But
Brad, question for you. Mike Deason has done a series of reports talking about the real number of riders with PSTA. And this report is showing an up of 1.7%, 4.6 to date. Is that still the accounting practice if someone is taking 4 buses to get to work and 4 buses to get home as 8? Or is it a net increase in the number of people who are literally using the service? Or do we figure on the actual number of people, at the increase in people who are using the service, or are we still just counting transfers?
We are counting trips taken on every bus. We are counting it the way we've always counted it, the way the federal government mandates that we count it, the way the federal government and every other mode of transportation counts it. So yes, every trip on the bus is counted, but this is an apples-to-apples comparison from the beginning of PSTA. It's always, and every other mode of transportation. Yes, if you would take 4 different buses, which we don't have very many people that do that, but if that would count as 4 different trips, even though it's 1 person. That is correct. But these numbers are always, and they will always be, trips taken on the transit system throughout the county, or even over throughout the region. The same exact mode. The report taken, and as Dr. Polzine, who works over at the University of South Florida, noted, it's the way everything
Okay, let me go back and clarify my question here. The way Mike Deason's been reporting it, it's upon PSTA. But my question is, when I was a kid, I mean back in the dark ages, and I would take the bus, for example, I take it from home and I wanted to go to a Cubs game. I mean, back then you could do it. I had to take 2 buses. That's the only way you could get there from where I live. When I would get on the bus, I'd pay for the ticket, and the driver would ask me, do you want to transfer?
Right.
The transfer was extra. Okay? Lesser, but nevertheless. If someone is going to take the bus, and they're going to be taking, say, 2 different routes, do they pay the fee every time they get on the bus? For example, if they have the monthly pass, is that, my monthly pass won't work. If you've got a tourist here, and they're going to take the bus, and it's $2 to get on, and they need to take a second bus to get to their destination, is it another $2?
Yes, it is.
So actually, the revenue figure is correct. The revenue figure is showing this is what actually is generated vis-a-vis the riders themselves, so the actual body count is almost immaterial if they're having to pay every time they transfer. So the next time Deason is interviewing somebody, why don't they just say, well, it doesn't matter, the usage, they're paying every time they get on, so what difference does it make? If they've got to take 4 different buses to get to work, they're paying $8 and they want to get home at $16. So it still comes out. I mean, this is, you're supplying a public service here that is generating revenue, so the next time Channel 10's beating on you, they ought to just turn around and say, well, fine and dandy, if they got to change 10 times, it doesn't matter. We're still getting the revenue stream off of it, because that's the bottom line, is to pay the overhead here.
Also, Brad, if I may, I think Deason's using the subway system analogy. When you pay to go to a turnstile, you can get off any train you want. These are buses, and they're surface level, so every time you get on, even if you got a monthly pass, you pay $60 for a monthly pass. You're paying even though you get to go on all the buses. Nothing's free. But I think he's looking at it as, like I said, if you went into a subway, you pay to go through the turn gate, and you can get off different trains that are connecting down below the surface. But buses are totally different. I think different analogies. That's all I can accommodate with that. Because even when the buses were in the city of St. Pete, we had to pay for a transfer, pay to get out, pay. I don't think it was ever free.
Well, and in our case, we offer a daily pass. So most sensitive, riders will say, which costs $4.50, you can ride any bus in the system all day for $4.50. So if you're taking 2 trips only, you're probably going to pay the $2 per bus, like you were describing, Commissioner Holmes. And if you are going to take 3 buses or more, then you probably might want to look at the day pass, which is $4.50, because it'd be a better deal for you.
Yeah.
That's how the system works. I think the transit system did have transfers way back in the day, but every other transit system in like our benchmarking program, which is 18 others, has gone to this idea of eliminating the transfers that you're recalling of old. That's sort of old school, and going to this paying every time you get on a bus or a day pass, whichever makes sense. And that's what we have.
For $104, you can get a day pass to Disney.
Yeah, now.
Well, yeah, right.
Commissioner Rice, on this subject, and then we'll go around for closing comments.
Okay, great, thank you. So, Brad, just to clarify, the ridership numbers that we report is a way to measure general utilization, and that conforms the way we report federal numbers.
That's
and
correct.
It's consistent with the way that we've reported numbers over 25 years.
That's right.
It is not the purpose to report unique bus riders, and that term has never been used in the context of how we report to the federal government and for grants, yada, yada, yada. That it has never been the intention to report unique ridership numbers. Okay, thank you.
All right. Let's proceed on to, we've covered future meeting subjects. Is there any other business? Board member closing comments. Commissioner Holmes, do you want to start?
I have nothing, thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner?
Well, certainly I appreciate the presentation today, very good. It was good hearing it the second time from last week. I would just, again, remind all of us that as we go through this process and we start to do this reflective part of the program, that we also, someone mentioned social media, but start to, again, communicate with the public every step of the way. One of the things we're trying to do is not only continue to look at our system, but also build credibility, whether you're a rider in St. Petersburg or in Eastlake. And to the extent that we're reviewing critically the process that we're going through, I think people will like to hear that. I think people will like to know that we're actually listening to what they said, and whatever they said, because they made several comments in November that we're all kind of filtering through our own system. But just to kind of continue to let them know that we've heard them, and that we're trying to not only stick to our core, but also to look at each part of that and let them know that we're going through that critical self-evaluation. I think people want to hear that about government, and they want to hear that about PSTAs.
Thank you. I thought it was a great meeting. I appreciated all the presentations. I just had 2 comments. The first was I wanted to thank Brad, along with Commissioner Long and several other members of the board, Darden Rice and Councilmember Newton, who've been advocating on behalf of PSTA's legislative agenda to bring a bus rapid transit system through a pilot project to downtown St. Petersburg. I like the way it was described and presented in the presentation today, that we have to look at finding savings where we can in our route structure, but also continuing to find ways to improve our system. And we heard the fact that, I think in Chris's presentation, that there are a lot of people that want to come to downtown St. Petersburg now. And the bus rapid transit route, I think, makes a lot of sense from a number of perspectives, from an economic development perspective, from a tourism perspective, in terms of getting our workers who work in the hotels out on the beaches out there in a more efficient way. We had a transportation committee meeting at the St. Pete Chamber yesterday morning, and we spoke with Senator Jeff Brandes by Skype, And he informed us that he was very supportive of that project, that he had gotten a number of calls from our board, but also from people throughout his district, and he was prepared to try to bring an amendment to the budget to include a portion of that funding. So I just wanted to thank everybody for their advocacy and their work on that issue.
Commissioner Scott?
Nothing here, sir, thank you.
Commissioner Rice?
No, thank you.
Commissioner Newton?
Yes, I want to thank the staff and also Rachel for getting me the list of the drivers. And also, on last Wednesday, Brad and myself, we did a bus driver appreciation, and Mr. Bradford, I don't know if he's out there, over at the Grand Central. And nothing was more eye-opening than actually see the drivers enjoy what they do. We had bus riders talking to us about some of the stuff these drivers put up with and why they should be appreciated, and they are. And it was eye-opening, and it was breathtaking. I just was hopefully would have had a lot more board members there. Would have been, if we were running from bus to bus as they come in, we couldn't get them all, but eventually they got picked up at other locations. I want to read the accommodations for February. We had 29 employees that got accommodations. One of them was a first supervisor, Richard Antunes, excellent customer service for going above and beyond. Andrea Daly, very bus operator. John Strategos, very nice and professional bus operator. Michael Saniel, very nice professional bus operator. Donald Fry, very good and excellent driver. Yolanda Gibson, very thoughtful, professional driver. David, very professional and helpful driver. Liner, courteous and considerate. Adrian Hampton Smith, very nice and pleasant. Grisby, he had 2 accommodations, very helpful driver. James Murray, very nice, kind and courteous driver. James Davis, very soft-spoken, polite driver. Brent Simmons, very professional, excellent customer service. Gloria Faison, very professional and awesome driver. Richard Gaylor, he's a very professional, helpful driver. Marcus Kincaid, being a great and fantastic driver. Dan McSweeney, great attitude and customer at ease on the bus. Bridget Mitchell, very nice professional driver. Jessica Cosme, very pleasant, helpful driver. Ruth Robertson, very nice, helpful, professional driver. Tom Reuben Bauer, very nice, helpful driver. Robert Olligood, very nice, helpful driver. Gloria Faison, again, very helpful, excellent driver. Clausen Jocelyn, excellent driver and going above and beyond for the passengers. Raphael Banco, very professional driver. Edmund Aluby, very nice and helpful driver. Adrian Hampton, ×2, very nice and helpful driver. I want to thank you guys. I know what you put up with. We heard it firsthand from some of the people that actually ride the buses. And we heard a driver come in, I guess not a driver, a bus operator come in this morning, and he challenged the board members to, ride the buses, come out and walk a mile or a block in their shoes and see what they put up with. I thank you for all you do. As you know, it's critical. It's the only means that some people have to get from A to B, and you are appreciated. Okay.
Vice Chairman?
I just want to wish everybody a happy Easter holiday and remind everybody that in Dunedin, this is Highland Games Week, and on Saturday it's Highland Games, and would love to have you all and anybody watching come visit for a great Scottish tradition.
Thank you.
Are you making it just holidays?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I don't think he's here now, but I'd like to thank Mr. Bell for coming in. I thought he spoke very eloquently about the role that the bus drivers play, and he did a great job of talking about how most of our bus drivers, in fact, nearly all of our bus drivers are in fact very high-quality individuals and do a great job and a great service to PSTA. Secondly, with regard to the audit, I'm very happy that our audit came off very smoothly, and hopefully we'll continue to do that in the future. Thirdly, with regard to Brad's presentation on the path forward, and also Chris Cochran's planning and Elaine Mann's input from TRAC, all that was very excellent. I just want to stress one thing that we talked about at the retreat, and that is we need to not forget that we are a service organization, a social service organization, and not a not-for-profit business. We have to continue to concentrate on providing service, transportation services particularly, for those who have no alternative to PSTA, while at the same time encourage increased ridership by those who have alternative transportation choices, but who want to ride PSTA because we want to improve our environment, we want to reduce pollution, and we want to increase the living conditions in Pinellas County for everyone. So we need to keep that in mind as we're talking about all these changes. We are primarily here to serve the public. Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you to all the staff for this 3-year presentation that we've got. My one thought is that as a board, it's important that we've got the 3 years considered, but also we should not be just thinking of 3 years. We should be thinking of 5 years and maybe even some notes about 10 years. And so I would like to suggest that the executive committee come up with something for the next 2 or 3 or years 4 and 5, and give us some sort of idea of where we really want to be at that point. 3 years is very short. So I'd like to see more work on that. Thank you.
Mr. Welch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Great meeting. I want to echo, are you Vice Mayor still, Mr. Barkley?
No, I'm just a plain old commissioner now.
Plain old Commissioner Barkley's comments on the importance of transit as a public service. I just think that's worth saying again. I want to remind everyone that the Firestone Grand Prix of St. Pete is this weekend in beautiful County Commission District 7, Commissioner Eggers. And I want to thank Commissioner Holmes for that real straightforward line of questioning on the ridership issue, and I think we ought to designate him as the standard responder to Mike Deason inquiries. So.
Very good.
Great job of that. So.
Happy to do it.
I know you would.
Just a regular old curbstone setter.
There you go.
Straight.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Excellent comment. Let me respond a little bit that Mr. Deason and I did have about a 15-minute on-camera conversation prior to that, the show that he put on. The question of how riders were calculated was not addressed to me, so I didn't have a chance to respond. I was very pleased that with the interview from the standpoint of questions I thought were factual and straightforward that I was asked to answer. So that's that subject. I think Councilmember Newton was represented a lot of us in thanking the bus drivers. I appreciate him going and being able to be there. I was not able to be there, but our drivers are the core of our system. Some of you know that the executive director, myself, and I believe Mr. Newton is also going to, as part of the legislative committee, to explain our opportunities to the folks up in Tallahassee. We're going up as part of the Chamber of Commerce group from Pinellas. The next thing I'd like to mention is that my personal goal for this year continues to be the functioning of this board and the governance of this board, and making sure that we are as effective as possible. That's the highest priority, and that's really an affirmation of the responsibility, I think, of the chair. And I that we have such wonderful board members that participate on this board, and they're active, and so I thank each of you for that. And finally, I'd like to thank the members who came and attended the meeting. Thank you for being here. And those that are watching on TV or on the internet, also thank you for paying attention there. And if you do have suggestions or comments, please send us an email or contact us by phone through the office. That's very important that we hear from you. And with that, I believe that all our business is concluded, and our next meeting is April 22nd. We are adjourned. Thank you.
I heard that maybe a majority of your presentation is going to be...
Moses? Yeah. I think Maroney's going up.
I got that guy.
I don't know where she is today. She was supposed to be here. But yeah, I think she's going up.
Yeah. Janet?
Pat Gerard.
Oh, so Janet took off, so she got a 4
Janet's
o'clock.
already up.
We're bringing her before she left. I don't think she must got a jet. She up there already.
No, headed up there.
She took off. Boy, look at her.
This leads to...
So.
I saw it, thank you.
I did. Yeah. That's probably good there.
Good to see you,
I
Joe.
didn't realize you were
Fred?
Largo also.
Oh, yeah, for years. So, good to have you on.